Well, welcome to lesson 4 of A Course in Miracles from the Sparkly edition. We'll get into it. It's late at night now. I haven't had a chance to get to this today, so I've got 10 minutes, so we're going to do it right now before bed. All right, lesson 4 is these thoughts do not mean anything, right? It's slightly different from the first 3 lessons in the application, but as with all the lessons, the instructions for application are written in the lesson. So just paying a bit of attention to how the application is to proceed, etc. We'll just get straight into it. These thoughts do not mean anything. They are like the things I see in this room, on this street, from this window, in this place. Right now, instead of using the physical eyes and applying the lesson to things you think you see, now you're learning to apply the lesson to things you think. Okay, so there's been a shift from the external to the internal, and that happens throughout the course as you go through various different lesson structures. All right, so unlike the preceding ones, these exercises do not begin with the idea for the day. In these practice periods, begin with noting the thoughts that are crossing your mind for about a minute. All right, so you're going to sit quietly and just pay attention to whatever's going on in your thinking. Then apply the idea to them. If you are already aware of unhappy thoughts, use them as subjects for the idea. Do not, however, select only the thoughts you think are bad. You will find, if you train yourself to look at your thoughts, that they represent such a mixture that in a sense none of them can be called good or bad. This is why they do not mean anything. In selecting the subjects for the application of today's idea, the usual specificity is required. Do not be afraid to use good thoughts as well as bad. None of them represents your real thoughts, which are being covered up by them. Right? Your real thoughts are not the thoughts you think you think. You've been duped. Right? Which is why studying this course with the conceptual, analytical mind, the egoistic mind, is really kind of pointless, because those thoughts aren't the thoughts that that you're trying to uncover. You're not trying to master. What would you put it as? You're not trying to improve your thinking, if you want to put it that way. You're trying to do away with that kind of thinking entirely, right? So it's not a course in correct thinking, or what do they call it these days? Everybody goes on about right-mindedness or conscious thinking or anything. It's not about that, right? This is something else entirely, right? This is the next thing, right? In selecting the subjects for the application of today's idea, the usual specificity is required. Do not be afraid to use good thoughts as well as bad. None of them represents your real thoughts, which are being covered up by them. The good ones of which you are aware are but shadows of what lies beyond. And shadows make sight difficult. The bad ones are blocks to sight and make seeing impossible. You do not want either. This is a major exercise and will be repeated from time to time in somewhat different form. The aim here is to train your mind in the first steps toward the goal of separating the meaningless from the meaningful. It is a first attempt in the long-range purpose of learning to see the meaningless as outside you and the meaningful within. It is also the beginning of training your mind to recognize what is the same and what is different. In using your thoughts for application of the idea for today, identify each thought by the central figure or event it contains. For example, this thought about painting the house does not mean anything. It is like the things I see in this room or wherever you are, right? Or this thought about blank does not mean anything. So whatever's like crossing your mind that you seem to be thinking about. You can also use the idea for a particular thought which you recognize as harmful. Okay? My thoughts about being worthless, or my thoughts about being overweight, or my thoughts about things where I dwell on and give myself a negative review and all those sorts of things. Right? This practice is useful, but is not a substitute for the more random procedures to be followed for the exercises. Do not, however, examine your mind for more than a minute or so. You are too inexperienced as yet to avoid a tendency to become pointlessly preoccupied. Further, since these exercises are the first of their kind, you may find the suspension of judgment in connection with the thoughts particularly difficult. Do not repeat the exercises more than 3 or 4 times during the day. We will return to them later. Right? And this type of exercise that deals in looking at your thoughts is repeated, especially in the first half of the workbook, quite a few times. And one of my favourite lessons is lesson 10, my thoughts do not mean anything, which is very similar to these thoughts do not mean anything. But so we'll just go through a little application period. So I like to examine my thoughts with my eyes closed. So for about a minute, and I'm not going to do a whole minute here, but like I'm examining my thoughts. There's a thought about this. There's a thought about that person, that situation, that event, whatever's going on. You just sit quietly and let the thoughts come to you. And then when you feel like you've sort of had a bit of a review of what's going on in here, a mental review, start to apply the lesson to the thoughts that you identify by the central theme. Okay, so this thought about the paint smell in the house does not mean anything. It's like da. This thought about the person that sent me an inbox message today does not mean anything, blah, 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 blah. Right? My thought, or this thought about what God is or God isn't, etc., does not mean anything. It is like everything else in the room, da. Right? And you do that for a minute or so, right? Morning, mid-morning, afternoon, and just before you go to bed, perhaps. But one of the things that happens, I find, especially in the beginning, and this is only lesson 4, is that you'll find you get a few minutes during the day where nothing's going on, and the tendency is to participate in that old cycle of thought, oh, what am I going to do? I'll go and have a look if there's anything in the fridge. Or I'll see what's on TV or the radio or whatever. And it's like at the end of the day, you'll be like, oh man, I haven't done my lesson all day. But there were all these periods during the day where in retrospect, you'd be looking back going, oh, I could have done my lesson then, or I could have done my lesson then. So remembering in the morning, and I used to write, the first year when I did the workbook, I didn't do this, but I used to write the second year when I decided I needed to make more of an effort. I used to get a marker pen, one of those oil markers that's hard to wash off, and I would write the lesson for the day on my arm, just the heading, and that would remind me. I'd see it throughout the day, and I actually did do the 3 to 4 practice periods a day, and in the setting where I was at that time in a healing center, in a spiritual center, where I was living for a period of time, other people who were also doing the workbook and other things would come up to me and grab my arm and go, what's the lesson today? I've forgotten. Be like I was like a walking reminder for quite a few people. So whatever it takes, there are apps you can get with the lessons. Don't ask me what they are off the top of my head. I couldn't tell you, but I know there are apps for the workbook lessons that will send you a little chime or a reminder tone on your phone 3 or 4 times during the day, whatever it is, and it'd be like, oh, do my lesson. Not always easy to do. I mean, these sorts of things sort of go off, and you don't want to be dependent upon something else, let's say an app, for you to remember to do your thing. It's better if you can try to train yourself or remind yourself, because what you're attempting to do is reclaim the power of your own mind rather than deferring it externally to an app or whatever, or even if it, writing on your arm. But initially I would say just do whatever it takes to do the lessons, right? If you have to set an alarm clock, set an alarm clock. But all right, well, that's it. So lesson 4, all right, that's the first one of actually examining your thoughts. The first 3, 1, 2, and 3 were in reference to external situations, events, things, objects, things like that. And this one's dealing with your thoughts, all right? And there'll be more of that as we go along. And I had somebody write to me today saying, where can I get a copy of A Course in Miracles? I want to follow along with these lessons. And these lessons, these first 50 lessons that we're doing now, they're going to be up on my wall for a good long time. Anyway, probably I'll just leave them there. So there's no necessity, if you're watching this one now and you think, I don't even have a copy of that book, just go grab yourself a copy off online, just type in A Course in Miracles and you'll find all sorts of places you can get it. There's free downloads and everything. And you can just do them anytime. I mean, it's not as if we're all together in a room doing this, you know. But I know there are a few people out there right now who are day by day doing this with me, so which is also very cool. So, all right, love you. And that's it. Lesson 5 will be tomorrow. I'll try to get it a little bit earlier in the day. All right, peace.